Welcome to Empowerment with Elysia. I am so incredibly excited to bring you all a very special guest from Australia, my friend Sean McBride, aka Captain Antarctica. Hello. You can see he's got his super cool outfit on, his Captain Antarctica outfit. Sean is an evolutionary anthropologist, which basically means he has studied the evolution of mankind and how it affects our thoughts and our actions over the last, like 100,000 years or so. And he also was in Australian Army Special Forces, and he was a wilderness survivor instructor. Basically, there's so many cool things. For the last 25 years, all over the world, he's taught people how to survive in the wilderness. Not only that, for those survival TV fans, he was also the games and challenges instructor and designer for the Australian Survivor TV show. There is so much more we're going to get to talk about today as we talk about purpose and, of course, Antarctica and flying and how it all comes together. So we will go through more of his accolades as we go through. But Sean, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Elysia. I'm glad to be here.
You're so very welcome. Goodness gracious, where should we start? How about what really brought you to Antarctica? Like, why Antarctica?
Oh, well, there's an interesting story in that, I suppose, in that I was at I'd rescued a bunch of kids in Thailand, and the
kids and the women from sex trafficking.
Yeah.
From your organization, the Gray Man, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that went for, we doing that for about 7 years, and I really loved it. And then we had a newspaper article come out saying that we'd faked the rescue of these kids, and it was front page and it was all rubbish. But, people believe the media, maybe not so much nowadays, but they still believe it. And that caused the whole organization to crash and burn. I stepped down to protect it. And it was a real gut blow, considering all the good work that we'd done, and none of it was true. But what can you do about the media?
Yeah.
So I kind of went into a mild depression after that for quite a bit of time, and then a friend of mine who happened to be a psychologist, she came over one day and she brought this big jar, and she said, I want you to put into that jar, write on little slips of paper, those things that you really want to do, like bucket list type of things, right? And so I sat there for a while and I thought about it. And the only thing that really, I've done a lot in my life, so it wasn't much on my bucket list I really wanted to do, but I'd always wanted to go to Antarctica, and I'd had a long interest in it. And I'd been to the Arctic, and I had taught survival in the Arctic. And so I put this one slip of paper in that said, get to Antarctica. And then that kind of, I decided to start investigating how I could get there. And I was researching, and this pop-up came up about this course in New Zealand. And that course was a postgraduate certificate in Antarctic studies, and part of it was that you went to Antarctica. So I got all my bickies together, all my money together, and went and lived in New Zealand for 4 months, and then went to Antarctica and camped on the Ross Ice Shelf. So, and the big thing about it was, by setting myself this bigger goal, it brought me out of the depression I was in after the demise of the Gray Man charity. So I think sometimes we need to set a goal that is, how do they say it? If the dream doesn't excite you, it's not big enough, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. And so getting to Antarctica was a big deal, because it's not cheap any way you look at it, unless
I can well imagine.
Yeah, unless you work down there or something like that. But it was probably one of the pivotal experiences in my life, because Antarctica is just an amazing place, and it's quiet. It gives you time to think, and it reflects. I see Antarctica as a mirror. It reflects you back at you. and you see yourself differently. And it has that impact on people. And I'm not quite sure exactly why, but a lot of people come away from Antarctica changed. So yeah, so that's the long story, I suppose, for how I got there.
Oh, that's fantastic. When you first stepped foot on Antarctica, what was that feeling like?
Well, it was boy, to get there 6 times, and Antarctica has at times quite bad weather. And we were flying in a military aircraft, and we had gotten to the plane like 4 times, I think, and each time it had been cancelled because of the weather or some technical problem or whatever. And then finally we got on the plane, and we were on our way to Antarctica, and we were flying over icebergs, and we were like 2 hours out from landing at McMurdo. And the loadmaster, I look across at the loadmaster, and he goes, and we turned around and went back because the weather had deteriorated. So we get out, we go back down, we do it again. We get on the plane, go off, we get down to 10 minutes from the point of no return where we have to land. And the loadmaster looks at me and he goes, we had to go back again. So it was like twice we did a 10-hour flight to nowhere. And we only had one last chance. And the one of the guys down there was great. He managed to convince the US National Guard to provide us with a ski-equipped Hercules. And in that, we finally got there. So you can imagine the sense of relief, because that was our last chance. If that didn't happen, it was over. We weren't getting to Antarctica. So when we finally landed, I got on my knees, I just kissed the snow, and I was like, thank you, God.
That's a fantastic story. So for those of us out there that are like, what's a Hercules?
Oh, sorry. A Hercules is a military transport plane. They've been around since 50s or 60s. Very efficient, great plane, but quite noisy when you're inside it, and not built for comfort. So, you're starting to get a bit antsy after 10 hours.
Yeah, I can well imagine that you'd be a bit antsy after 10 hours. So speaking of planes, what started you on your journey of wanting to become a pilot? You just got your pilot's license in 2019. And again, congratulations on getting your transcontinental navigation.
Thank you.
License.
Yeah, look, that started a long time ago when I was a kid. I think most boys want to be a pilot, and happily now a lot of girls want to be pilots too.
Yeah.
And I actually started to learn to fly when I was about 17. Did about 5 hours. Was just short of doing solo, and it was getting pretty expensive. Even back then it was only like $50 an hour. But that's probably the equivalent of what it is now, which is probably about $350 an hour, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, look, it's not flying is not a cheap game. Anyway, I stopped doing it and just put it on hold. I tried to get into the Air Force, but I ended up getting through to the Air Board, and the day before the Air Board, I went to an Air Force base where I was shown around by a group captain, and he was very negative about the Air Force, and he kind of put me off. So when I went to the Air Board, I'd gotten through everything. I went to the Air Board, and they asked me about how I felt about combat missions and something, and I said, well, I'd rather not drop bombs on villages. And that kind of ended my Air Force career.
They're just like, you're not meant for this work.
You're not that kind of guy, no. Which is strange when you consider that later on I went into special forces. But anyway, so I just put it on the back burner. Not even the back burner. I just forgot about it all after that. And then during COVID, I was sitting there, a bit of my hands. I was working from home, and I just thought, why can't I? I'm 63 now. And I said to myself, well, at that time, I must have been about 60. I thought, why can't I get my license now? I've got all this free time and I could do it. So I actually, I watched some videos actually of some of your American bush pilots, Trent Palmer and Jonas Machenko, and that inspired me. And so I went and did it, and eventually went from nose wheel aircraft to tail wheel aircraft, which are trickier to fly, but that you can land them in a lot of places, and just went from there. And at 60, I have to tell you, you know, I never thought this, but at 60, it took me a lot longer to get my license than it did when I was training at 15.
Interesting.
Yeah, you do slow down, you do forget things, which I don't want to admit, you know, but I actually found that, and so it took me a lot longer than I expected, but eventually I got the license. So now I'm qualified, and now I can fly anywhere. It's recently flying anywhere, and the adventure begins.
That's so cool. And you're getting to go to an island just, you know, today, later, if the weather holds.
This afternoon, I'm going to see if I can land at this little airstrip called Dunwich, and people fly in there for breakfast on a Saturday sometimes. So I'm just going to see what it's like, because it's a little bit of a tricky airfield in terms of the wind shear and stuff like that. So I'm just going to give it a test run.
Sounds fun. So the interconnectedness that you talked about when we first started, what do you see the interconnectedness between Antarctica and finding your purpose and flying for you?
Well, if you think about it, what I tend to do, you know, I have some of these Facebook groups and things like that. Excuse me, I often ask people, what's your Antarctica? You know, Antarctica for me was the thing that moved me out of depression and gave me a goal that was bigger than me and that I was challenging and all the rest of it. And it's the same thing, say, with flying. You know, as I said, you know, most boys want to learn to fly, but a lot of them don't. Out of, well, maybe I couldn't do that, maybe I couldn't afford it, etc., etc. But finding purpose kind of comes, in my experience, to some degree, it kind of comes from setting goals that are bigger than you. And in that process, you often find purpose. So that's why, to me, it's all interconnected. You know, I had a goal of learning to fly, even though it took me, you know, 60 years. I had a goal of getting to Antarctica, and I got there. And I'm not saying that those things are necessarily your purpose, but by setting goals, you can find purpose, and it's kind of like a byproduct of that. And my purpose now, I suppose, after having been to Antarctica, is to turn people on to Antarctica to help protect it, because it's being affected by global warming. And if Antarctica goes, I don't think people realize how important it is to the world's weather and sea level rise and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I guess that's my purpose at the moment. And I don't think people necessarily have to have a purpose for life. You can have a purpose for the moment or for the few years, and then you may find another purpose. You know, life is not static.
Definitely not. Would you like to share a couple of the things about the environment in regards to Antarctica while you have the floor?
Sure. Well, you know, West Antarctica is melting. I mean, Antarctica is a big place. We're talking, you know, it's bigger than Australia. It's bigger than America. And it's a huge ice-covered land. And we're talking, you know, maybe 3 kilometers or so thick of ice. But because of, you know, climate deniers out there, but I think the evidence is pretty clear now that we are the ones who are interfering with things. You may hear my cat in the background.
Yeah, I was like, what is that? I think it's a cat.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Haven't seen him for days, and now he comes up. Anyway, so West Antarctica is melting. The glaciers are receding. there's been some very unusual heat waves down there, and what that will eventually do is affect the weather up here, or it already is actually. Antarctica affects rainfall in the Pacific Islands. It affects the weather here in Australia. It circulates the world's ocean water, and a lot of the air movement is created by Antarctica as well. So you've got all this happening, and if we lose Antarctica, all that's going to change. And so that's one of the reasons that I think we need to protect it for our own good. But it's just an amazing place. So, why not protect something that's beautiful? And come here, you. Come here.
Absolutely. So I have a little bit of trivia that I would love to ask you about in regards to Antarctica. So I heard that there are horses in Antarctica. Have you seen the horses in Antarctica?
No, you may have been given a bit of a
or it was just like a really old story that a long time ago there was an explorer that was in Antarctica, and he had a horse and its fur was crazy long, of course, and that he fed the horse penguin meat to survive in Antarctica.
Yes, sorry, that is true. I was thinking you meant, are there horses there now? The answer is that.
I wasn't sure if any other explorers were still taking a horse.
Well, actually, the early explorers, the early British explorers, they did take Siberian ponies to Antarctica, and the ponies were there to drag the loads of all the equipment they were carrying, and they were effective to a degree, but they really didn't work out that well. Dogs were a much better bet, but the British were kind of a bit, they poo-pooed the idea of dogs to some degree, even though they had them. And most of the ponies, well, pretty much all the ponies died in Antarctica. Sure. And they ended up eating them mainly after they died, or they put them down. And there were, at one stage, I think they had some donkeys down there, and of course there were the dogs. And Admiral Byrd actually took three cows down to provide milk, and one of the cows died, but two of them made it back to America and were traveled around the country and became famous celebrity cows. Go figure.
I now need to Google cows that have been to Antarctica.
It's different. I can't remember their name. There was a calf born on the way down, or actually in Antarctica, and they named it Blizzard, and Blizzard came back as well. So
that's amazing.
Antarctica is just full of wild stories. It's a great place.
I can well imagine. What's your favorite wild story about Antarctica? Aside from the baby cow being born named Blizzard, that's pretty great.
Okay, well, probably my favorite is the ongoing conspiracy theory about Antarctica that there's a Nazi UFO base down there. That's probably my favorite. I've had let's say discussions on Facebook with conspiracy believers who think that Admiral Byrd went down there and fought a battle against the Nazis from their UFO base. And the Nazis supposedly got down there. They hooked up with these aliens that were living in caverns underneath Antarctica. They learned a bit about the technology, so they built their own UFOs, flying saucers. And then when Admiral Byrd went down to wipe the Nazis out, they had a big battle, and the US Navy got their ass kicked and sent back to America, and the Nazis are still down there. None of which is true, but that doesn't, I don't want to let that get in the way of a good story.
Good, just a good yarn. You haven't found any evidence of it yet in your explorations of flying over Antarctica and on foot. And
what they say, an absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So maybe they're still there. Maybe.
So you've been down there. Have you actually done any work with the dogs, like pulling?
No, because and it's a kind of a pity in a way, but in 1993, under the Antarctic Treaty, or the Madrid Protocol, which came in, they basically banned any exotic animals from being in Antarctica because of the possibility of them spreading disease to the local wildlife. So all of the dogs were removed. So there are no dogs in Antarctica anymore, and yet, they decades in Antarctica, and they provided a bond for the people down there, because people love dogs. And then the downside was that they used to feed them penguin meat originally, so
Right.
they'd have to kill penguins for them. And then I think they started to ship in other dog food for them. But eventually, I think 93, they removed the last of the dogs.
It seems like they would just be able to test them for diseases or whatnot before bringing them.
Well, they used to go through quarantine, but I think it was just, it was like a blanket approach, no animals.
Yeah.
That's it. Get them all out of there. So,
No, it makes sense to me.
And it kind of makes sense, because there's the possibility of spreading disease, I suppose.
Makes sense. So what's with the outfit, my friend? Your Captain Antarctica outfit. When did this come to be, and how did this happen?
Well, I actually started Captain Antarctica before I went to Antarctica because I was really interested in the place. And so I started off with a Facebook page and a web page and various things, Instagram. And what I did some research, and what I found was that people are much more likely to accept a message, especially children, but adults as well, if it comes from a superhero. So I created my own superhero, Captain Antarctica, and I give lectures at libraries in various places, and I try and spread the word about Antarctica to all and sundry. And the thing about for some reason, and I'm still researching and getting my head around this, but for some reason, superhero grand, Marvel superheroes, in terms of movies and all that kind of stuff. And superheroes have had an incredible ability to change the world. And you may not know this story, but, back in the 1940s, after the Second World War, and this amazes me, after the Second World War, you had just fought a war against the Nazis, okay, and their racial beliefs and all that kind of thing.
Sure.
There was a resurgence in America of the Ku Klux Klan. Okay, so you've just fought a war against Nazis, and then you have this group that are in many ways similar to Nazis having a resurgence in America. And so this fellow went in and started investigating them, and he found that they were up to all kinds of things, and that often, local police and whatever were involved with the Ku Klux Klan. And so he wasn't getting much traction when he presented this information to the authorities of what they were up to. So he approached, at the time, there was a very famous radio program, Superman. And he approached the writers of that show and said, look, this is what's happening. And they decided to write a Superman series called Superman Against the Fiery Cross, something like that. And it went to air, and people listened, and it was really popular. And by the end of that series, it had such an impact that the Ku Klux Klan membership, in terms of recruitment, disappeared. No one was joining. And
That's excellent.
Sorry, say again?
That's excellent.
Yeah, exactly. No one was joining. And actually, from that point on, people used to turn up to Klan rallies and heckle them. because of Superman. And to me, that shows you the power of the superheroes. As a really a rehash of ancient Greek and Roman gods, if you look at the powers that they have. And so mythology plays a big part in human development and human ideals. And so I'm trying to bring that together in a way that I suppose inspires people, but also passes on a message that, one, we need to protect the planet, but two, you can be much more than you think you can be.
I love that. Yeah, that's so interesting. I was actually talking to someone at the grocery store, and I was telling him about this interview, and he was just a little bit downtrodden, and he just felt like he wasn't enough, you know.
It's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah, he's just like, well, he's like, well, it just makes me feel small. And he's like, I'm just doing this job. And but you can do anything you want just because you're doing this right now, even if it doesn't seem like a lot to you. You can pivot in any moment and become something new and something different that
absolutely
helps you feel like you have value. You know, because we all have value. It can just look differently. And just because a movie star has a lot more visibility doesn't make them any better than any of us that are out here, no matter what job we're doing.
For sure. And they have their own issues and problems to deal with as well.
100%. There's different things that go along with that, things that they sacrifice in order to pursue their dreams at such a level with such visibility and their privacy, for one, you know, and tons of people just throwing all kinds of energy and thought in their directions.
For sure. And also, you know, that belief, I mean, I used to be, many years ago, I was a rebirther, as in, you know, I don't know if you've heard of rebirthing, but it's also, nowadays, I think they call it conscious breathing. And it was a way of releasing a lot of internal things and tapping into higher states of consciousness and that kind of thing. And I think you find, well, I found that probably the most common belief that people were carrying around was that I'm not good enough. And so that person that you met at the grocery store, you know, they're battling a belief that's keeping them in place. And, you know, it takes a bit of work to overcome those kind of beliefs and reprogram.
Right. It absolutely does. We call it a lot in the coaching world as imposter syndrome.
Yes, that's a good one.
Yeah. And I feel like most people that I talk to, regardless of their status in life, deal with that on some level. It can be rather loud at times.
Yeah, and everyone is going through this to some degree. I mean, I don't think you can necessarily, you know, people want to get rid of the baggage from their past. You know, it's made you what you are. I don't think that you can actually get rid of it. It's not like a piece of luggage that you can just throw into a dumpster, right?
You don't usually just get to like snap your fingers and just be like, you know, like we're not going to do that anymore. Like it's fine. No, it's like years sometimes of work on
Exactly.
yourself.
It's a work in progress. And I don't think that you ever completely get rid of it. It's always going to be there to some degree. It's how you deal with it and how you move on in spite of it. And we really should just forgive the fact that we chose to believe that way in the first place, because it usually came from someone else anyway. And move, you know, and keep moving forward in spite of, you know, we might have that baggage might have originally been the size of a semi-trailer, and now it might be the size of a handbag. You know?
Exactly. Or, you know, like 100-car train. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And in spite of that, I'm just going to go and do what I've set my mind to do.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just a different way of building muscles. That's all.
That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
People are like, why are you so strong? Oh, I just have a lot of baggage to carry. My endurance is really
good point. And it can make you stronger. I mean, it can obviously work to weigh you down as well. I mean, the ultimate is that it works to weigh you down so much that people become depressed and commit suicide. And suicide is a very sad response to a temporary situation, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So the more we can do to help people clear up that baggage to some degree, the better lives all around.
Yeah, that definitely resonates with me. When I was young, every day from age like 13 to 26, I had suicidal thoughts at some point in each of those days. And very few people, if anyone at that time of my life, actually knew that that was going on. And it was
Yeah.
just something that I battled through on my own. I didn't have a coach or a counselor or anybody to talk to. And I have a family member who committed suicide. And so
Wow.
it's, yeah, and friends over the years. And so it's something that lives very like deep inside of me. The importance of creating safe spaces for people to feel seen and heard and understood and supported in a non-judgmental fashion. It's a really big reason why I do all these interviews with people, is to create that space so that somebody might hear a story that's told on one of the interviews and feel like they're not alone. They're not the only person out there in the world struggling with these things. And if they can hold on, that they can find support, that they can just keep breathing and move through that moment. And then one day we get to wake up and be like, it's gone.
And sometimes all it takes. Yeah, and sometimes all it takes is that one word of kindness or inspiration to keep people going.
It's true. It's just like you never know what's going on behind the scenes and with somebody, even if they're putting on a happy face. And that's why it's so important to just be kind.
Absolutely.
We all have rough days.
Sorry?
We all have rough days sometimes.
Yeah,
like,
for
just
sure.
Be kind. And sometimes like maybe you're just feeling crappy yourself and all you can muster is not to be mean.
Exactly. And the Dalai Lama said, my religion is kindness. And I think we have to remember that. That's probably the best religion you could have.
I totally agree with that. And authentic kindness, because there's absolutely a difference between just placating someone and actually showing up in a real way.
Yeah, and also, some of the things that we do that appear to be kind are really coming from. So pure kindness is a different kettle of fish.
Yes, most definitely. It's interesting with the wilderness survival skills that you do, because finding a way to be kind and be in your authentic self is a form of survival. I feel it's a different sort of survival skill. And you've spent 25 years teaching wilderness survival skills all over the world. So what would be some key points that you feel like you took from that experience and going through those different developmental ages yourself, from a young man into a more mature space?
Well, when I was teaching survival, I used to hold up my hand and say, there are 5 elements to survival. And I'd often not mention this first one, but I'd say the second element is shelter, water, fire, and food. But the most important element, attitude. And so it directly relates to what we were talking about there, in terms of this baggage that we carry. Attitude will get you through a lot of difficulties in life. If you can build resilience in your life, and the only way you build resilience really is to encounter difficulties and come through them.
It's true.
If you have the perfect life, not that anyone does, but if you have the perfect life and you never encounter any difficulties, then the first time that something negative happens, it's very easy to fall apart. But I found from my experiences with survival and with special forces that you get to a point where the 15th crappy thing has happened and everything's a mess, and the plane that was supposed to pick you up has been diverted, or you've been and this has happened, you've been parachuted into a crocodile infested swamp, and you just go, let's get on with it. And that's brilliance.
Yeah.
Life is the journey. That is the journey.
Yeah, the journey definitely just being like, sometimes you just have to take a deep breath and keep moving forward.
Exactly. And, you know, enjoy the moments along the way. I mean, you can find joy in the present moment if you look for it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Everything is about perspective. We can always decide like how we assign value to different emotions, different experiences. Society tells us oftentimes that we're supposed to assign value in a particular way. Like rage is really bad, except for rage is the appropriate response to injustice.
Absolutely.
Love,
And
love
I'm
is
a big fan
great.
of that.
Yeah, and like love is great, but tell that to the person who has a stalker following them.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
stalker loves them.
Yes. Yeah.
No,
It's all about perspective, isn't it?
it's all about perspective.
And, you know, like rage or anger, I mean, you know, I think I mentioned at some stage in the past when we were talking that I am a Zen monk.
Yeah.
Well, you know, people think that monks are always calm and that, you know, there's this peaceful aura surrounding them and all that kind of thing, right? And my wife will tell you that I am the worst monk that she's ever met. And the reason for that is that people think that, you know, you don't get angry, but, you know, I'll be doing something on the computer and I'll be like, computer, right? And then she says, and you're a monk, right? And you're a monk. And I say, it's not the anger that's the problem. It's the holding on to the anger that's the problem. So you can blow up and it's gone as long as you let it go. And then you just move on. It's when you carry anger for a long period of time that it leads to other things. And one of the things I have a theory about is that depression, not always, because I think depression can come from a whole range of different things, even biochemical and whatever. But in my experience, often depression is anger at a situation that we feel we can't resolve. And it's long standing. And so over time, that anger becomes depression, changes into depression. It's like you've heard that experiment where they put the dog in the cage, and whenever it went to move to, I can't remember, to get food or whatever, it would be given an electric shock. And this kept happening. And then eventually the dog just went and sat in the corner and did nothing because it didn't feel that it could resolve the situation, right? And I think that's the same with a lot of things that happen. We end up in situations, and because of society or our own moral beliefs or whatever, we don't feel that we can change that situation. It makes us angry. We can't resolve it. And then over time, that anger just sitting there gradually changes into depression.
Yeah, I guess
not always.
Anger to apathy to depression.
Sorry, anger
to apathy to depression.
Yes, very good. And so that's why I think sometimes it's better to express the anger in the moment and get it out in the system, and then, you know, much less likely to lead into apathy and depression down the track.
That makes sense.
At least that's what I tell my wife.
I think that it's important for us to be okay with experiencing the full range of human emotion, but understanding how to healthily channel it into something that's functional with the least amount of damaging ripple effects to others. So how do we acknowledge what we're feeling, create a safe environment, advocate for our needs, and create a space where we can channel it in whatever way that looks like, be it yelling, punching a boxing bag, you know, like going for a run, playing pool. Yeah, there can be all sorts of different things that people want to do when they're angry.
And I think also that people shy away from conflict, which is understandable because most people don't want to be in a conflict situation. But years ago, I did a workshop with a fellow, I forgot his name, Michael Crum, I think it was, who was an Aikido master, and he wrote a book called The Magic of Conflict. And it was a really interesting workshop because he was talking about how, you know, there is magic in conflict if you learn how to deal with it. And you know, he gave he gave the example of he was giving a lecture to a group of monks, strangely, Christian monks, I think it was. And he said, so does anyone think there's a time when, they could kill someone? And everyone's like, oh, no, 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 no. And then one of the monks puts up his hands, the head monk actually, and he says, oh, yes, I can. And he said, what if there was it's a very hypothetical situation, but let's say there was a murderer who has a gun and is going to shoot a child. Would you, and you had a gun and you could shoot him before he killed the child, would you do it? I think most people probably would. So there are, and that's not exactly an anger case, but there are times for action, and there are times for inaction. But you need to have life experience to determine when is the time for action and when is not.
Right, to be able to have discernment.
Yes, exactly.
And it's just learning, because sometimes people get so caught up in their emotions and the shame, the judgment that oftentimes accompanies them because of how we're conditioned, that it makes it more difficult for people to become discerning and come to that space of neutrality, to be like, okay, what is the pragmatic response for this situation?
And also you mentioned at the start about my background in anthropology, like evolutionary anthropology. Well, people are running to programs that are 1 million years old, things like anger and violence and love and all these emotions, they developed over time to give us the best chances of survival. So a lot of these emotions, they're not bad. They're just, we're kind of like robotic in a way, in that we simply run to a program. It's only when you can step back from that and, as you say, develop some discernment to know when it's appropriate to use some of these emotions, and when you're actually just running a script.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious, as an evolutionary anthropologist and doing the wilderness survival skills all over the world, if you experience different things culturally with that concept. Like, as you shifted from one place to another, how did you adapt within that knowledge base?
Yeah, well, most of my teaching was done in the Western world, so America, Sweden, Britain, Australia, various places like that. So I wasn't necessarily coming in contact with other cultures from that point of view, but I did spend time with Indigenous people in the Arctic, in Australia, of course, Aboriginal people. I still have contact with a lot of Aboriginal people. And they do view the world differently to us. And, that can work for them and against them. I think there are lots of positives in a lot of Indigenous cultures, and there are aspects of Indigenous cultures that actually work against them in the modern world, unfortunately.
Yeah. When you were in those places, did they teach you things for your wilderness survival skills that you hadn't already come across?
Yeah, sometimes. Unfortunately, a lot of Indigenous people have lost those skills. And sometimes it was me reteaching them skills that they remembered that their father could do or their grandfather could do. Like I was up in the hill tribes of Thailand, and I've got some good friends up there, and I remember I was teaching them the bamboo fire saw, which is a way of lighting a fire using bamboo. And I had all these kids and all these adults gathered around to watch this happening, and quite amazed. And one of them came up to me afterwards and said, he would have been in his 60s, and he said, my father used to do this technique. So they were very excited to see it, but at the same time, this guy holds up a lighter to me and goes, world's changed, they don't need that anymore. They had a cigarette lighter that worked for them.
No, that makes sense to me. It's It's an interesting sort of thing. I remember the first time I tried to go camp. I went camping later on in life, and I was over by Yellowstone, and I was trying to make a fire. The people I tried to put together a tent. It was hilarious. These guys that were next to me camping, and I'm like trying to put these balls together. I have no idea what I'm doing.
No idea. No idea. Yeah, I've seen it plenty of times.
I was just saying, oh my gosh. I was even in my 30s, I think. I grew up on 15 acres. We didn't need to camp. My dad and my grandfather made something like a 30-foot dragon ship for us. We had like a legit Viking ship growing up. It was amazing.
Wow.
My mom painted it, and we had a mast and a sail, and we had tin garbage can tops for the shields.
Wow.
We had a bug lamp. Yeah, it was amazing. We had a 13-foot teepee that we got to paint. It's just giant bonfires the size of houses. It was amazing. Gardens. And so we learned how to do things that way and make like bows and arrows out of Scotch broom and different things and build forts. And it was a beautiful life. But so I didn't know how to do traditional camping though. Because we just right. And so I was trying to put that together, this tent, and finally, after I watched the guys like laugh at me basically for 10 minutes, I was like, "Do you want to come over here and like help me put this thing together?"
Yeah, I thought they would have offered, but anyway.
No, it was really funny. But then I have this really large diving knife, and but it for some reason it also had a flint box on it, like a piece of flint, and so. Yep. I'm just like, okay, I'm going, and I know the right kind of moss to put on the fire, because I remember it from the one time I ever went to camp as a kid when I was in 5th grade. So I gathered my moss for the fire, and I managed to not chop my fingers off while I actually made fire with a flint and a knife.
And you got it going.
And I got it going, and I didn't chop my finger off. I was very proud of myself. And I almost got my finger one time, but it was like,
well done. And so embarrassing when you lose a finger in front of a bunch of guys standing around helping you build your tent. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was bad enough that it was really funny. It was really funny. Great. It's a great moment. That's when I think.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it was fun. I love getting to travel around, and I didn't catch anything else on fire.
Well, you just traveled across the States too. Was that any camping in that?
No, just truck camping. Nope. It was still wintertime, and which I know is laughable since you travel around in Antarctica, and I'm just like.
Well, tents are a bit overrated. If I had the option of nowadays, or I had the option of a hotel or a camper van or a truck with a mattress in the back, I'd go for that.
Yeah, I slept in the back seat of my truck, and it was quite funny. I definitely felt like a princess in a pea, because I have this Chase lounge that's about this thick, and I pulled the mattress off that, and then I put a 2-inch like air mattress for camping underneath that, because I slept on it the first time without the 2-inch, and I was like, this is not comfortable, because I'm only 5'4", so I barely fit in the back seat of my truck. Nice. And yeah, which is great. It's one of the benefits of being short. And so I put it underneath, but then I had all these blankets on top, so I would climb into my Ford F-150 that's already kind of tall and try and squeeze into all my blankets. But there was this one time I was in Amarillo, Texas, and I thought that I was going to die, because I was pretty certain that there was going to be a tornado, and I'm very scared of tornadoes because I outraced one time when I was in Louisiana. That's a different story. So I parked my truck, and I finally moved it a couple times, and it was at like a Love's truck stop or something like that, where all the semis go. And I parked my truck, and it was 18 degrees outside with the 15 mile an hour winds coming through. So it was pretty darn cold. And I parked, and I'd barely fallen asleep. And all of a sudden I hear this like crash, and I pop up. I'm just like, what's happening? Because, I'm already afraid that tornado is going to come and kill me. Mm-hmm. And I pop my head up, and I see people running, which is not a great sign.
Yeah, it's an indicator, isn't it?
What's happening? And I open up my door, and I asked us, what just happened? And I parked next to a fence, this big, tall, like 6-foot fence. And this woman had erratically driven through the parking lot and drove through the fence and missed my truck by like no more than a foot while I
Wow.
was sleeping. And there was just like 30 feet of boards at least on the other side. And she just plowed through and just kept driving and went back on the freeway.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a different sort of wilderness survival.
Yeah. Well, dealing with people is a survival situation sometimes.
I think that's probably one of my craziest stories from all the times I've traveled. I mean, that last trip was my 9th time across the country in the last 8 years. I think I've
Wow.
cumulatively driven, yeah, I think I've cumulatively driven at least 58,000 miles.
That's amazing. I haven't even done that here in Australia. I'd rather fly it.
Yeah, people ask me all the time, they're like, why don't you fly? And the thing is, I know so many people around the world and I love driving. Driving is my decompression time. So if I have the
Yeah.
time and I have the money, I would rather drive and connect with my friends around the United States.
Sure. No, it makes sense.
So, but anyways, we're coming close. That time I just flew right by. Do you have anything in closing you would like to share with the audience?
Oh, let me think. I would say to people, ask themselves what's their Antarctica, and for those who have not finding purpose in. Actually, I just run this past you. Years ago, I did a course with Robert Kiyosaki, and he said to people, in terms of purpose, to ask yourself 3 questions, and the questions were, what would you do if you were suddenly your rich uncle died and he left you $14 million a year for the rest of your life? What would you do? And the second question is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And the other question was, what would you do if you only had 6 months to live? And I think,
all good questions.
Yeah, and I think, the thing is with, say, the money one, people think that they need money to, obviously people need money, but people think they need to be super wealthy in order to achieve something. But it's not really the case. I mean, you can enlist people in your dream who will help you, and without having a lot of money. I've done that myself a number of times. The 6 months to live, that narrows things down, like what's important to you in the because we're all going to die at some stage. So what's really important to you? Do it now. And the third one, what holds a lot of people back is just fear.
Yeah.
And that old saying about fear stands for the future experienced as reality. And you don't know until you try something whether it's going to work out or not. But I heard something the other day I thought was really good. It said that fear is just excitement without the breath. So breathe.
That's so interesting. I have another way to talk about fear, which is fear is false evidence appearing real.
Yes, that's a good one too. And I think it's true. You confront these fears, and it's part of that resilience. You confront your fears, it makes you stronger, and therefore the fears have to be bigger next time to actually make you pay attention, because you've overcome the smaller ones.
Definitely. So my friend, who inspires you in the world today?
In the world, I suppose one of my biggest inspirers was probably I'm terrible with names. You'd think I'd remember someone who inspired me. But the Sea Shepherd organization. Yeah, well, the founder of the Sea Shepherd organization inspired me. He was probably the inspiration for setting up the Grey Man organization. I actually sent him my green beret many years ago, and he put it on in the wheelhouse of his flagship for a long period of time there. And I think just because he was committed to protecting the world's oceans, and he did whatever it took, and he was not affected by what other people would say and all the negative stuff that came out against him. You know, so I was quite impressed with that. So yeah, I'd say him, if I can ever remember his name.
Let's find him and put him in the comments.
Well, Paul Watson.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, Sean, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you getting to take an hour out of your day and share some stories with us and some laughter. And
my pleasure, Elysia, and keep up the good work. People need to hear more positives in the world. I think there's plenty of negatives out there.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So, if anybody out there, as always, if you'd like to be on the show or know anybody who would like to, or if you'd like to do any sort of collaboration with me or empowerment coaching, you can find me at www.globalequineaffiliates.com, and of course on Instagram at Elysia Buss. And we hope you enjoy this show. So until next time, we'll see you later. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.